She didn't leave a will. She didn't leave much money. But what my grandmother did leave me were 8 words, whispered just hours before she left this world. 8 words that shaped everything I became. 8 words that, years later, I still live by. That night, I thought I was hearing her last breath. Turns out I was hearing my first clue on how to really live. Stories about final words always feel sacred, don't they? Like the universe opens just enough for one last truth to slip through. For me, that moment didn't come with drama. No thunder, no cinematic goodbye. It came with a whisper. So faint, I almost missed it, dash, dash. From a woman whose hands taught me more about kindness than any sermon ever could. Her name was Maria, but everyone in our family called her Mamma Mia, because somehow she mothered everyone. Before I tell you what she said, I need to tell you who she was. Mamma Mia never went to college. Her education was life dash dash. Growing up between wars and harvests, raising 5 children while her husband worked miles away. But she carried herself like someone who had dinner with wisdom every night. She wore her gray hair like it was starlight, and her wrinkles like chapters she refused to edit out. She believed in 2 things: clean hands and good manners. Clean hands, she'd say, because the world is dirty enough already. And good manners, because to her, kindness was language first, then gesture. As a kid, I saw her as unbreakable. She was the constant. Even when everything else in life changed, her laughter never did. The first time I ever prayed, it was because she whispered, "God listens better during storms." I didn't get it then. Years later, it made sense. She meant storms quiet the world down long enough for us to speak honestly. Time, however, has a strange way of repeating its lessons until you finally understand them. The older I got, the less I called her. Not intentionally, just how growing up sometimes steals relationships. One later at a time. Then one call changed everything. Mom's voice quiet and trembling. "She's not doing well. The doctors say it's time to come." Hospitals have a scent, a mix of sanitizer and goodbye. When I walked into her room, the sound of machines was the only heartbeat I could trust. And there she was, my grandmother, smaller, thinner, but somehow still luminous. Her eyes didn't look afraid. They looked settled, like someone who already knew the ending and was okay with it. I pulled a chair, took her hand. She smiled. "You finally came back slow enough for life to catch you." It was such a her thing to say. Half joke, half sermon. That night, everyone else had gone home to rest. I stayed. Her room pulsed with quiet light from the hallway lamp. The nurse said she'd probably sleep most of the night. But old souls have their own clocks. Around 2 a.m., I heard her shift slightly. "Child," she whispered. I moved closer, kneeling beside her bed. "I'm here," I said. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I want to tell you something," she breathed. Every part of me froze. I thought, this is it, the part I'll carry forever. She leaned in, exhaling between each word, and said, "Forgive the world before it teaches you why." At first, I didn't understand. It sounded beautiful, but impossible. I asked, "What do you mean?" She let out a soft chuckle, barely a breath. "You'll know when the world forgets your kindness." Then she fell back asleep. I didn't realize those would be her last words to me. By morning, she was gone. Peaceful, but that sentence whispered through my days for years afterward, like a seed waiting for its season to bloom. Grief has this strange taste. It's both heavy and hollow. After her funeral, our family tried to return to normal. As if normal still existed. Her chair in the kitchen stayed empty for months. Nobody dared to sit there. I kept hearing her voice in small things, when the oven beeped, when the wind rattled the curtains, when silence stayed too long after laughter left, and those 8 words kept replaying. Forgive the world before it teaches you why. At first I thought it meant be kind. But kindness is easy when life behaves. She was talking about something much harder. A year after she passed, I got fired from my job. No warning, no handshake, just politics and cost cuts. I remember sitting in the parking lot, watching the same car I used to drive to work suddenly look smaller. Anger burned in my chest. I wanted revenge, vindication, justice, anything but peace. Then out of nowhere, her whisper replayed. Forgive the world before it teaches you why. Forgive this? Forgive the people who'd smiled in meetings and stabbed me in secrets? Number. Not possible. But something in me softened just enough to drive home without bitterness boiling over. And that small act, that refusal to become cruel, was the first time her words made sense. Because holding on to pain was easy, but holding on to grace took strength I didn't know I had. It didn't erase injustice, but it kept me from becoming it. 2 years later, I fell in love. She was kind, intelligent, honest. We built a life that looked perfect on the outside. But somewhere between wedding photos and anniversary dinners, I noticed myself starting to love conditionally. You see, pain teaches you to guard your heart. But my grandmother had taught me to leave it open, even when the world doesn't feel safe. So when that relationship ended, when the person I trusted most said, I can't do this anymore, I almost broke completely. Every cell of me screamed, why does love hurt like this? And again, I heard her voice, the whisper I couldn't unhear. Forgive the world before it teaches you why. Forgive her? Forgive love itself? Yes, because bitterness is the slowest poison. That realization didn't happen fast. Forgiveness never does. But little by little, the ache turned into clarity. I stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, what is this teaching me? And the answer was peace. Peace doesn't cancel pain. It just sits beside it calmly until it learns to breathe. The more I lived, the more I realized how prophetic her words were. She had gone through worse, losing 2 children, surviving war, choosing love in a world that kept breaking. I used to think she was strong because she never cried. Now I know she was strong because she knew when to cry and still choose hope anyway. Her faith wasn't loud. It was steady, like a heartbeat under layers of doubt, and forgiving the world. That was her rebellion, because forgiveness to her wasn't just mercy. It was strategy. It kept her from turning into the enemy she fought. A few years later, I started something new, my own business. I felt brave, like maybe grief had turned into gratitude. For a while, it worked. Then things collapsed again. Bad timing, mistakes, people I trusted walking away. One night, surrounded by unpaid bills, I laughed through tears and whispered, "All right, Grandma. Forgive the world, huh? What about when it keeps hitting back?" It wasn't until months later, when things began slowly rebuilding, that I understood the why. Forgiveness was never about letting wrong things slide. It was about refusing to let them define me. If I had kept dragging around every person who'd hurt me, I'd never have hands left to build anything new. Her 8-word sermon wasn't about forgetting pain. It was about freeing space for joy afterward. Years later, I went back to her house, or what used to be hers. The walls had faded, the paint peeled like it wanted to tell stories. Her chair was still there, still empty. I sat in it, closed my eyes, and almost expected her to scold me from the kitchen for sitting in her spot. Instead, I felt something else. Not mystical, just comforting, that same quiet strength. Like her voice still lived in the air between cracks and dust. I imagine if she were alive, she'd ask me about love and failure, and whether I remembered to say grace before meals. I'd tell her about all the things I learned too late, and she'd probably laugh and say, "Better late than never, child." My niece, who just turned 10, asked me what Grandma was like. I told her stories about her garden that grew both roses and weeds she refused to pull out because they deserve sunlight too. I told her how Grandma used to pray, not for blessings, but for endurance. And then I told her about those 8 words. Forgive the world before it teaches you why. My niece squinted. That's confusing. I know, I said. I didn't get it either. You'll understand one day. She smiled like she believed me. And in that moment, I realized that's how wisdom travels. Not through grand lessons, but through whispers borrowed by generations. A few months ago, a friend betrayed my trust. Old me would have turned cold. New me remembered her whisper. Instead of lashing out, I sat down, explained how it hurt, and wished them peace, even if distance was needed. That night, I didn't sleep angry. Because forgiveness isn't pretending betrayal didn't happen. It's choosing not to become the bitterness it wants you to carry. That's when I realized. Her whisper had become reflex. Forgiving wasn't effort anymore. It was instinct. And I wish I could tell her how right she'd been about everything. Years later, I finally wrote those 8 words down and framed them above my desk. Every morning when life feels ordinary, I read them out loud, because forgiveness isn't just mercy. It's clarity. When you forgive, you tell yourself, this pain taught me something worth keeping, and now I'll let the rest go. And that's how wise people stay alive, long after they're gone. By leaving blueprints for peace, written between the lines of their hard-won scars. Mamma Mia didn't teach philosophy or wealth. She taught resilience, dressed as forgiveness. And every time I choose calm over cruelty, I hear her voice again, laughing softly, proud, saying, "You're learning, child. Grief fades, yes, but some love doesn't end. When the story does, it just changes frequency." Her whisper started in that hospital room, but now it lives in how I treat people, in how I forgive, in how I love carefully but fearlessly, because the whys never die. They just echo in us. And sometimes, if you stay quiet enough, you can still hear them reminding you of who you can choose to be. The older I get, the more I realize her last words weren't about religion, morality, or destiny. They were simply a roadmap. Forgive before you find out why. Because by the time you do, you'll have already spared your heart from hardening. That's how she lived. That's how I try to. Even now, when life feels unfair, I remember her eyes that night. Tired but kind, fading but fearless. And I understand now why she whispered instead of shouted. Truth spoken softly stays longer. If I could see her again, I wouldn't ask her for anything new. Just permission to tell her story, so the whisper never dies. She would smile, hold my face between her gentle hands, and say, "Good. The world always needs one more forgiving heart," because sometimes the smallest sentences carry the biggest eternities. And so, after all these years, I still hear her voice whenever I'm tempted to rage, to blame, to close off. Forgive the world before it teaches you why. That was her farewell, her prophecy, and her gift. Because the whys never die. They just echo in us.